Welcome to this webinar put together for you by the Gene Bank Accelerator, the area of work 3 on genetic resources policy. Over the course of the next hour, we want to give you an initial introduction, of course, to who we are and an overview of the developments that have led to the last negotiating meeting that we'll be focusing on primarily in this webinar. And in that context, we want to give you an overview of the status of the negotiations with respect to particularly important aspects of the package of measures that a negotiating group is working on to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. And then, of course, we'll talk about next steps in the negotiating process and opportunities for engagement with our group as we proceed over the course of the next 6 months. So the objective of this webinar is to share information about the status of the negotiations and to open up avenues for your participation and engagement over the final stages of the negotiations. And why now? Why are we holding this webinar now? It's because we're nearing the end of the scheduled negotiations. The governing body is meant to be adopting a final package of measures to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system in November of this year. And there is just one scheduled interim negotiating meeting before that in July of this year. The outcome of the negotiations could have significant impact on CGIAR operations as we deal with plant genetic resources for food and agriculture and related digital genomic sequence information. So it's important that all of you working in CGIAR know what's going on and are comfortable with the direction that the negotiations are going and are on board in the event that we need to respond quickly in the next 6 months if there are unforeseen changes in the direction of negotiations. And why us? Who are we? The people who will be speaking in this side event and those who have helped put it together are myself, Michael Halewood, Isabel Lopez Noriega, Claudio Chiarola and Mathieu Huard. We all work with the Gene Bank Accelerator with this area of work on genetic resources policies, excuse me, extending, of course, to digital sequence information. And we've been coordinating CGIAR's engagement in these negotiations since they started. So I just want to give a little bit of background about how we got to where we are now. As all of you will no doubt be aware, the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing has been operational since 2006. Excuse me. Somebody, we can hear your voices. Could you please mute? Thank you. The multilateral system of access and benefit sharing has been operational since 2006, when the governing body of the Plant Treaty adopted the Standard Material Transfer Agreement, which we've all been using to transfer PGRFA since then. In 2006, the CGIAR Centers hosting ex situ collections also signed agreements with the governing body, agreeing to manage their collections under the framework of the Plant Treaty. In 2013, the governing body launched a process to enhance the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing, and it did so because the levels of monetary payments from users of the system who had been commercializing products developed from materials they received from the multilateral system were very low. In addition, fewer countries were making material available as proactively as some thought they should at that time. So to try to break that stasis, the governing body decided to launch negotiations to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system, to come up with benefit sharing measures that would increase the amount of payments from users into an international fund created by the Plant Treaty, and also to expand the scope of the multilateral system from the listed 64 crops and forages that are currently there to a larger number of species. Those negotiations continued from 2013 to 2019, but then were suspended by the governing body because they'd hit a roadblock. Contracting parties involved in negotiations couldn't agree on a formula for benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information, and they couldn't agree on rates for payments associated with different benefit sharing modalities that they'd been working out up until that point. So then for 3 years, we had silence. We didn't have negotiations, but then those negotiations were relaunched by the governing body in 2022 and are scheduled to finish, as I said earlier, in November 2025. And in the interim, between 2022 and 2025, there's been something called the Working Group to Enhance the Functioning of the Multilateral System that's been meeting fairly regularly to negotiate a package of measures that will be presented to the governing body for adoption in November 2024. And as I said before, the next meeting of that working group to enhance the functioning of the multilateral system will take place in July of this year in Lima, Peru. So when they relaunched negotiations in 2023, they basically agreed to pick up where they left off in 2019. So they're using the so-called June 2019 draft package of measures as the basis of negotiations. And that is comprised of 3 fundamental components. One is a draft amendment of Annex 1 of the Plant Treaty to increase the list of materials included in the multilateral system. As I say now, there's only 64 crops and forages. One option being considered right now is to expand the Annex 1 to all PGRFA, which would be a very significant, dramatic expansion of the scope of the multilateral system. The other component in the package of measures is the Standard Material Transfer Agreement, but revised to include a number of the elements that have been the subject of the ongoing negotiations, including new benefit sharing approaches, termination clauses, etc. And finally, a draft resolution, which would be adopted by the governing body, partly just to adopt as a way of adopting the amendment of the commitment to amend Annex 1 of the Plant Treaty and the Standard Material Transfer Agreement, but also including additional elements for the overall improved system that aren't contained in either Annex 1 or the Standard Material Transfer Agreement. Since that relaunch, again in 2022, the primary focus of negotiations has been on what the co-chairs of negotiations have referred to as 3 hot issues, and they are benefit sharing for digital sequence information. Recall that the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing originally has been set up for benefit sharing from the use of material genetic resources, not digital sequence information. So this is including digital sequence information within the scope of the treaty and benefit sharing in particular for that use. So that's been a big challenge and continues to be a big challenge. Also payment rates and payment modalities. And again, this expansion of the list of crops and forages that are included in the multilateral system. One point worth noting right now is that CGIAR is the source of approximately 90% of the plant genetic resources for food and agriculture that are distributed under the multilateral system since 2006. A relatively small proportion of the amount of material we distribute goes to the commercial sector. This is a reference in this pie chart to distributions from the gene banks. If one includes also materials from the breeding sector, that percentage is actually lower. So a lot of the focus of the negotiations, of course, has been on trying to increase the amount of money that's paid by commercial users to an international fund. And that, of course, requires addressing concerns that commercial users have had in the past about the way the multilateral system was structured, and disincentives that they felt they had for taking material under the current SMTA. So negotiations have focused a great deal then on the perceptions and the interests of the private sector, trying to make it more attractive for them to use the multilateral system, but simultaneously to get them to pay more into the multilateral system. So it's a little bit tough to make it more attractive and at the same time try to get them to pay more when, of course, paying more is less attractive. But that's what we've been focusing on for the most part. So where are we now? Nothing, of course, is agreed until it's all agreed, but it does appear that we are headed towards a system based on the use of a revised SMTA that will include 2 payment options for recipients to choose between when they access material. The first, the more innovative option, is something called the subscription system. And pursuant to the subscription system, a subscriber would agree to enter into a 10-year subscription, making payments based on their annual sales of all their plant genetic resource for food and agricultural products of the Annex 1, of the 64 crops and forages that are currently listed in the multilateral system. So you would agree to make that payment on all your products, regardless of whether or not each particular product actually incorporated materials from the multilateral system. This would have the benefit of reducing the need to track and trace uses into particular products, which is the current model, and we'll get to that in a moment. It would involve upfront payments, regardless of use each year, so you'd have a predictable flow of money into the multilateral system from subscribers. Of course, because they're paying on their entire portfolio of products, the payment rate would be considerably lower than under the single access option, which I will describe in a moment. And something we felt was very important from the beginning when we started talking about the subscription option would be that there would be an exemption for users whose annual seed sales fell below a certain threshold. And the threshold hasn't yet been set, but there's been discussion of 10 million a year, 20 million a year, 5 million a year. Yeah. The second option that a recipient could choose from when accessing material from the multilateral system is something called the single access option. And this is the one that's closest to the current default benefit sharing option that's in the standard material transfer agreement right now in Article 6.7. Pursuant to this option, a recipient would make payments based on the sales of products incorporating the material that they receive from the multilateral system, and only on those products. So if a product that they sold did not include or incorporate material from the multilateral system, they wouldn't be paying on it. So in this case, you access material, you would use it in your crop improvement program and not start making payments until such time as it's commercialized. So it's a delayed payment structure. And you don't know, of course, whether or not payments would ever be made, because you don't know if material accessed from the multilateral system will find its way into a product that's commercialized. The payment rate here would be considerably higher than that of pursuant to the subscription system, and higher still if the product is not available for others for research and breeding without restriction. And it would be lower if the product is available for others for use for research and breeding without restriction. So in the latter case, that's closely modeled on what's currently in SMTA Article 6.8, which is voluntary payments if products are available for without restriction. That would now make that a mandatory payment, regardless of the fact that the product was available without restriction. So that's closing a gap that currently exists in the current SMTA. However, it's not a total reproduction of Article 6.7 and 6.8. The negotiators have been trying to respond in this enhancement process to concerns that the seed industry has had about the operation and the structure of the benefit sharing under the current SMTA. In particular, it's been structured in this current draft SMTA so that the benefit sharing obligations no longer are lasting forever, and they're no longer viral in nature. So the benefit sharing obligations on a recipient would expire for plant genetic resources under development and eventually for products from which they're derived when they contain less than a certain percentage of multilateral system materials in their pedigree, or if they contain traits of value. Sorry, again, we can. Excuse me, we can hear somebody speaking. If you could turn off their microphones. So this is very different than the current situation, because right now any incorporation would trigger benefit sharing, and it continues on. So here in this situation, if you developed a new product and wanted to license it, and it included less than X% of MLS pedigree material in its pedigree and didn't include a traded value from MLS materials, you would license it free of any benefit sharing obligations under the plant treaty. And that's a big difference from the perspective of the private sector, which is never like this never-ending benefit sharing obligation and its viral nature. And of course, as a result of that, there's a much reduced tracking and tracing obligation or implications for private sector users. So overall, in this package of measures with these two different options, there hasn't yet been a serious discussion of the actual rates of payment linked to each one, but you can see the overall relationship between them. If you had a single access recipient and they were commercializing products that were not available for others for further research and breeding, that would be the highest rate. And then if you had single access recipients commercializing products incorporating MLS material, but they were available for further research and breeding for others without restriction, that would be a lower rate. Then if you had a subscription system with products restricted, a lower rate still, and then the lowest rate of payment would be a subscription system where the products are not restricted for others for use for research and breeding. I'm going to stop now and turn over to my colleague Claudio Chiarola, who's going to talk about the digital sequence information benefit sharing options under consideration. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and he's going to share his.
Thank you very much, Michael. That's perfect. All right, I hope you can see and hear clearly.
We can.
Perfect. So with respect to the aspects of this negotiation that relate to digital sequence information and the sharing of benefits derived from their use, as Michael has anticipated, in case of subscriber to the new system, the payments that would be made on the overall sales of crops that are within the portfolio of a particular subscriber would reflect the sharing of benefits both for the use of the material as well as for the use of the digital sequence information. So this is in particular clarified in the resolution that addresses issues of implementation and that sets out this possible solution in this term that I've just explained. Now, the challenging part is for potential users that have received materials under the single access option, because under that particular option, a solution has not been identified yet. There are some attempts that have been made, but generally, as there was during the negotiation, also a certain polarization between groups of countries and regions that would have preferred to have a subscription system only, and others that are more adamant to keeping in fact the single access. Therefore, it was difficult to come to terms also with this question on digital sequence information for the single access that is not accepted universally by everybody, but that at this point it seems obvious that it will have to stay, because otherwise the reform will not be acceptable by a majority of or by a group of countries. We don't know if it's the majority or not. So in this case, it's sort of problematic, and we have also noticed, without any doubts, that after the last conference of the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, known as COP16, a decision was taken on how to operationalize their system there is a multilateral mechanism for the sharing of benefits from DSI that also encompasses the plant and animal breeding sector with particular characteristics, and provides the possibility to exempt, of course, users that make payments under other recognized systems, such as the one under the treaty. So there's an issue with respect to their mutual supportiveness that has also been considered and addressed. Now, the issue is that until COP16, it was not yet clear, or it was not yet decided if the multilateral mechanism on the SI under the Convention on Biological Diversity would have been mandatory or voluntary. And after COP, it was clear that the nature of the obligation to make payments under the system are voluntary, primarily voluntary in nature. So the pressure on the negotiators and on the different contracting parties is much less now to find a specific solution that works for the agricultural sector in the context of the treaty, because in any case, they know that under CBD, there are no teeth to, for the time being at least, to require these payments from breeders. So in terms of the relationship, again, with the Convention on Biological Diversity, it is, I think, quite straightforward that if a subscription system is adopted along the lines that Michael has described, then the payments that are made by subscribers would also encompass and count towards the sharing of benefits for the SI, and therefore these users that are subscribers would be exempted under the multilateral mechanism under the CBD, under the Convention on Biological Diversity. On the other hand, it looks like that if, as of today, the benefit sharing obligations for DSI are not structured into the package for the single access, then logically, whatever regulations or requirements are established under the multilateral mechanism, those would also apply to those that have received materials under the single access option in the context of the multilateral system of the treaty. I would also like to highlight a proposal that was raised at the last meeting in April with respect to DSI governance. So there was a civil society organization that was supported by 3 countries from the Asia region that introduced some additional requirements that are not, for the time being, they were not envisaged in the system, that relate to the fact that those who are accessing digital sequence information derived from plant genetic resources, food and agriculture that is taken from the multilateral system, they would have to be subscribers in the first place of the multilateral system, and they should also produce proof of compliance with data management principles that are yet to be developed under the auspices of the treaty. So here we can see clearly this proposal comes from a particular side, that is the one that sees the future the subscription-only system with a more articulated governance mechanism for the use of DSI. So this was not discussed at the last meeting. The parties had the opportunity to table new proposals, and they were captured and reflected in the text. So they are going forward for consideration at the next meeting, but there was no scope for others to react, to object, and so on at this time. So they were just tabled. There was no substantive discussion on those. And we expect that there will be some good resistance on these by other countries, so we are not tremendously worried about it, but of course we need to keep an eye on how the discussion evolves, and of course this issue could also be used by the proponents of these proposals as a bargaining chip to obtain something else in other areas. Then I would also like to give a couple of more details about the expansion of the crops included in the multilateral system that Michael has just alluded to at the outset. So the proposal on which the co-chairs are working on and that has been discussed so far envisages an expansion of the crops in the multilateral system with a number of safeguards, what I improperly call safeguards. That is that basically the multilateral system would cover potentially all plant genetic resources, food and agriculture, not just the current Annex 1, but all of them. If they are, of course, under the management and control of the contracting parties and in the public domain, which is a requirement that is already applied and present in the treaty, but only those that are in ex situ conditions. So this is already a limitation compared to Annex 1 that covers ex situ as well as in situ. And then finally, in terms of safeguards, there is the one-time possibility for contracting parties to, when they ratify this amendment to the treaty, because the amending the annex is an amendment to the treaty, when they ratify, they could declare a limited number of species in a national list that they wish to exempt. So this is, again, is one time only. It applies only for the country that sets out this list of exemption when ratifying and not to everybody else. And of course, the contracting parties that raises this kind of sort of reservation to include particular species, they can then remove them in due course. So there's a mechanism for that as well. Now, this is the core package that has been discussed, but we know that there is also the risk that there could be an alternative scenario that might be considered. And that alternative scenario is to try to expand Annex 1, adding species to the current annex. So one by one. And this, of course, is a lot more difficult because everybody has to agree by November of this year, basically. And it can be challenging because there's been no discussion, substantive discussion on a revised annex with additional species as such. Again, this is a possibility, but this route is quite difficult to pursue at this point. There's also a timing challenge that is very, very important to understand the dynamics of this negotiation, and that is the fact that, well, the governing body, of course, they can adopt the package with the new SMTA, and of course, in the resolution, they will adopt also the proposed amendment to the annex to the treaty, and the SMTA will become operational then in June 2026. But again, the annex being part of the treaty, as I said, it requires to be ratified by contracting parties. And based on the current rules of the treaty, 2/3 of the member states that have already ratified the treaty would have to ratify the amendment. And that amounts to more than 100 countries. And that can take a long period of time, especially if you know, the current lack of trust by let's say, developing countries, third world countries, and so on, the mistrust that they have that the new system will produce the benefits that they expect from it in terms also of monetary benefit sharing through the benefit sharing fund of the treaty. So in that case, the situation can be very, very challenging because if there are no substantive payments, new payments that are made by users into the system, then countries will not have the incentives to go back to their government, to their parliament, and to push for the ratification, and this ratification might not happen. And when a revision will be made of overall reassessment of the situation in 2031, the risk is that the system will collapse because there is a built-in solution that will basically revert back to the current system if the amendment is not ratified and does not enter into force. So it's a chicken and egg problem here because we want more payment. We want a larger annex, but if there are no more payment, then probably the ratifications are also not coming forward quickly enough for this deadline to be met. Finally, I'd like to also spend a couple of words on the question of intellectual property rights that could be granted on, of course, inventions, particularly patents, that could limit then facilitated access to the materials in the multilateral system. Of course, the treaty and the current Article 6.2 of the Standard Material Transfer Agreement provide for some limitations as to what the recipients can do with the materials, saying that they should not seek protection for inventions that they develop, when again these could limit the facilitated access to the material received or the genetic parts and components in the form received from the multilateral system. This was a very controversial issue during the negotiation of the treaty, and of course there are different interpretations to it. And including countries, when ratifying the treaties, have made some interpretative statements to the treaty, saying that, of course, if inventions meet the requirements under IP law, these rights should be granted. But nonetheless, there is a real issue here that concerns the possibility, for example, that when a patent is granted on an invention that involves naturally occurring traits that are present in the multilateral system, then nobody else, even if other breeders can get that material from the multilateral system, potentially they may not be allowed to use those specific traits that are subject to patent protection, because in the jurisdictions, again, where these patents have been granted. So we have, prior to the last meeting of the working group, we teamed up with two experts, external experts, Paul Oldham and Michael Koch, and we developed a study on this particular issue, developing a landscape of the patents that have been granted of native traits, and we presented these to the members of the working group, giving background information on the different typologies of patent claims that can be granted for different typologies of inventions that might or might not affect availability and use of PGRFA from the multilateral system. And ultimately, some parties have decided to introduce this new text that is reproduced here, which also requires recipients to disclose the multilateral system material that they have used in their patent applications. And this is going to be possibly one article in the Standard Material Transfer Agreement, which will increase transparency, but not only for the sake of transparency, also because, as Michael has explained, the payment rates is different depending on if the product is available or not for further research and breeding. So it will be very important for determining the rate of payment to know if a particular subscriber or recipient has indeed this type of patents that restrict access or not to the original materials or to subsequent products in particular. The original material in principle should remain available. So we are also having a webinar that we've organized together with the System Office Legal Office on the 20th of May, where we will be presenting the results of this study. If you're interested, there's an invitation that will be circulated very soon. So with that, thanks a lot. And I think Isabel is going next. So Isabel, over to you.
Yes, thanks very much, Claudio, and thank you everyone for joining. Good day to see some friendly faces in this webinar. Very quickly, so that we have time for some questions afterwards, and I will be happy, Claudio or Michael, if you could run the slides from your side. I see that you're about to leave. Yeah, so if you can leave them, only a few additional slides. So focusing on a couple of three additional issues that are being considered by the negotiators. One is what we call direct use. The background for this is that currently the standard material transfer agreement is to be used only for the purposes of research, breeding, and training for food and agriculture. But more and more, gene banks around the world, and particularly international gene banks of the CGIAR system, receive requests for what we call direct use, which is a request for germplasm for direct deployment in farmers' fields, or for release, multiplication as commercial varieties, new commercial varieties in target countries. Since our mandate is to operate under the multilateral system, the mandate of the gene banks is to operate under the multilateral system. We are uncertain about what instrument to use, even if we have the legitimacy to share germplasm from those gene banks for purposes that are not research, breeding, and training for food and agriculture. If the material that we share with certain recipients can be used as such for particularly commercial exploitation, for release as new varieties, registration and release as new varieties in countries, and the multiplication and commercialization. And we and other countries raised this issue in the course of the negotiations for the enhancement of the multilateral system, as a small group on direct use discussed this issue and proposed a way to approach it within the text of the standard material transfer agreement and the resolution of the governing body adopting this new standard material transfer agreement. And this is the solution that they propose, is to broaden the interpretation of product to include materials to include materials received under the SMTA as such. Sure, after they have been characterized and evaluated, so research has happened on them, but they can be commercialized as such, as a product, according to the definition of the SMTA, and therefore the beneficiary obligations of the SMTA will apply to that product that is basically the same material that has been obtained from a provider under the multilateral system. The consequence of this is that we will have an increased scope of what can be done with materials under the SMTA. The recipients will be able to commercialize the materials as such, multiply them and commercialize them. And the centers will have to label improved materials as PGRFA under development if they don't want the recipients to use those materials as products directly in the market. And this is because if you label your PGRFA, the PGRFA that you are providing as under development, you can include additional terms and conditions. And one of them can be you're not allowed to commercialize this material as is, or if you want to commercialize this material as is, you can come to me. And this will be particularly useful for breeding materials for which the centers want to have control over until they are put in the market. Next slide. Also, another concern we have had has been that with the subscription system, the subscribers may be tempted to start asking for a lot of materials from national and international gene banks. So paragraph 19 of the draft resolution addresses this concern by saying that there are limits to the availability of national and international gene banks to respond to large requests covering a broad range of materials. So this will, let's say, cover our backs in the case that some users come to us requesting for large amounts of materials that the gene banks or the breeding programs are not prepared to provide. Next slide. So next steps, and this is a long list, so I'm going to summarize what is going to happen. So in July 2025, so in a couple of months, the working group for the enhancement of the multilateral system will meet again. And the GenBank Accelerator, the policy team of the GenBank Accelerator, is going to be coordinating the different events and the development of the different outputs that will inform our contributions to this working group meeting. And this includes organizing webinars. This includes consultations with director generals and the System Council IP group, the GenBank managers, so key actors within the CGIAR system. And also consultations with contracting parties, regional groups on as a needs basis to follow up on relevant issues, basically the ones we have described today, and then contribute to papers, position papers, discussion papers that on issues that will be addressed. And we will participate in the standing group of legal experts that has been reconstituted by the co-chairs of the working group. And of course, we will draft submissions and share them with parties in advance, and so on, so much, and so forth. And then the following step, after this July meeting of the working group for the enhancement of the multilateral system, will be the governing body meeting, which is when the governing body needs to make a decision about this enhanced multilateral system. So again, we will be reporting back and consulting with CGIAR leadership after the July meeting of the working group. And following that, or in parallel with that, we will be preparing submissions and interactions, submissions from CGIAR, interactions between CGIAR delegation and the different regions and stakeholders, preparation for the governing body meeting. Next step. Most of the things we are doing in the international sphere in relation to digital sequence information, you can find them on a dedicated web page under the CGIAR website. And this is just a snapshot of that web page and the list of things that you can find there. So if you are particularly interested in learning how things are going on the digital sequence information front and what CGIAR is saying and doing about that in the international arena, this is the place to go. And of course, you can contact us directly as well. And just two highlights of the multiple submissions we are doing to this international fora. One is this policy brief on generation, use and sharing of digital sequence information in crop improvement, submitted to the working group for the enhancement of the multilateral system last year. And the other one is this pattern landscape report that Claudio has just mentioned, which was also submitted as part of the process for the enhancement to inform the discussions for the enhancement of the multilateral system. I think that my part finishes here. Yes, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel and Claudio. We have 13 minutes for comments and questions from any of you who have been watching this webinar. So please put up your hand and we'll give you the floor.
There are several comments, questions. Yeah, on the.
Alexandra, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Take the microphone and speak.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'd like to ask you, and I'm not particularly sure if it's going to be to Isabel, or regarding the DSI, you know that we have some level of redundancy. And I was just wondering, like, when someone applies for any specific right in terms of sequencing, would that be related specifically to the sequencing from that specific accession, or we are considering a broad spectrum of that? Because, for example, we are discussing a lot of the rationalization of our collection here, and we have sections from many countries that are potentially duplicates, and some of them without a precise origin, so they are land races. So, how should is this subject being discussed there? I don't know if you understand my question. Was clear? Like sequence of accessions that came from different countries, but are still are unique, are duplicated, and they are morphologically and genetically the same.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask, for example, a patent from a land race from Colombia, but you also have the same accession from I don't know, Chile, and would that expand to all the other accessions, or would that be confined to that unique accession? Would the other countries would have would benefit from that patent as well, or only the country from which the knowledge was obtained? I was just wondering if this is being discussed.
Yeah. I understand the concern, Alexander, particularly in relation to this expectation that the countries of origin will be mentioned more and more in the databases, countries of origins of the genetic resources from which the DSI has been obtained. Yeah. And also in patents, as Claudio mentioned, no, and this good practice of mention, not even good practice, but maybe even a requirement to mention the countries of origin of the plant genetic resource that have been utilized in a patented invention. That is a tricky question. I don't have an answer right now. Maybe Claudia and Michael, you do. But it seems to me that your question is it's another like evidence of the fact that in view of these expectations and even requirements in relation to management of data and metadata of DSI, we need to put our heads together and come up with ways to do this in a sensible and defendable manner. And the example of the duplicates within the CIP gene bank is a very, very clear one, and probably it's not the only case across CGIAR gene banks. So yeah, we should note this down and make sure that is one of the things we address when coming up with perhaps like system-wide methodologies, approaches, practices for managing DSI and DSI metadata in a way that is responsive to international bodies' expectations as expressed in the COP decision, in Cali, and whatever the governing body decides in relation to the multilateral system and DSI under the multilateral system. That's my answer. Makes sense, and does respond to your concern a little bit, Alexander?
Maybe I'll just add one thing. I think you added your question had a couple of parts. One had to do with what to do with redundant accessions, and of course we have an archiving policy now, so that we can justify archiving materials and addressing those redundancies. And we can come back to that later. The very problem with patents, of course, is that even if you patent one material, it has knock-on effects for the use of other materials that include the same traits. That's why we're concerned about this. So if the patent is based on the use of material, let's say from Bolivia, but it can end up having an impact on all the material that includes that trait, be it from Bolivia or other countries, or even other species that have the same trait. And that's why this is a live issue. It needs to be considered. And finally, the benefit sharing payment would be one that goes back to the benefit sharing, international benefit sharing fund maintained by the plant treaty, not back to the country from which that material was originally sourced. So even if it was a restriction on a product developed from use of material originally collected from Bolivia in your collection, the benefit sharing payment doesn't go back to Bolivia in any case. It goes to the international fund. So, yeah, I see other hands up, and we have very little time. Kuldeep, please.
Thank you, Michael, and all. I have a couple of queries which still are not very clear to us. For example, what Isabel told was about the number of the accessions which are being requested. So are we proposing some limit on that one? And that could be different for the vegetatively propagated species vis-a-vis the seed species, because many people have started asking you, send us complete 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, and many of them have started bullying as well if you don't respond that one. So this is one thing. Probably something somewhere we can propose some sort of limitations. Also, this direct use of the germplasm. That's still not very clear. What are our propositions? Are we really supporting it that the germplasm, anyone can use the land races and do some sort of selection from the land races? And if they are adapted to that new region, they can release those under the public system or the private system, because this is coming up in many underutilized species that the land races can be really directly used to this one. My another thing, Michael, will be just difficult. Of course, I know there's still large number of the gaps in germplasm collections. And CGs are not participating actively in the germplasm collecting missions, and we all know their limitations. Could there be some way the CGs can propose that before we lose that germplasm, which is not collected, which is not in collections, either both in national collections or the CG collections, there could be a way out of really joining the national partners and getting into the collecting missions along with them. As Crop Trust had funded some missions in last 8 or 10 years, those went very well. Could some sort of system could be really thought of to be proposed to the next governing body meeting? Thank you.
Thank you. I think your questions on big requests and direct use were covered by Isabella Claudio. Do you want to answer those?
As you like. I mean, yeah. That on direct use, this is something that some centers have been already doing. There are sensitivities around it, like some countries don't feel comfortable sharing their land races this way, because once it is in the open market, then they are available to anyone under non-beneficiary conditions. But we are supportive of this approach because that will mean more material being used from the gene banks, not only international gene banks, but national gene banks as well. Does this, respond to your concern or?
Yeah, that's fine. Means as long as we are supporting that one, we have some idea that we are supporting this idea. Whether it is approved or not, that remains with the contracting parties. But our stand is that we are proposing, or we are supporting it. That's the important thing for us.
There you go. Okay. The other one, maybe some of you want to take it, Claudio, or on the last request. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just say the large request, we don't have a solution necessarily. What we have is a recognition that it's a challenge, and that already is a big step. Because in the situation now where a subscriber is making payments annually on the basis of all their sales, you can almost imagine subscriber rights. I'm making these payments. I expect to get as much germplasm as I want quickly, because I've agreed to this benefit sharing formula, which is a generous one on their behalf. And we wanted to flag up front when that came that, look, they may have those expectations, but those expectations have to be realistic. CGIAR has said since 1994 when we signed our interest agreements, and then in 2006 when we signed our agreements with the governing body. There have to be recognized limitations on our ability to respond to big requests for veg crops, but also for seed crops. If somebody's asking for the whole collection, that has to be recognized up front, so that in the situation where we can't respond, we have flexibility. And no one can turn to a subscriber can't turn to the CG and blame us for the system not working because we didn't give them everything they wanted right away when they asked for it. So in a sense, it's a reiteration of the concerns we've raised since the multilateral system was created and even before. And you'll notice that the draft text they have actually makes a cross-reference to the statement that CGIAR published when we signed our governing body agreements in 2006. So it's raising the profile of the issue and creating space for us to have a response on a case-by-case basis in the future.
Michael, there's an important question, I think, from Chris in the chat. He's saying most materials currently goes to researchers. Is it possible that material from these researchers will subsequently be transferred under the SMTA to others with commercial interests? Does the SMTA have the ability to capture any ABS payments that may arise in this situation?
I responded in written form, but maybe you want to add, guys. It's okay. That's fine. Yeah.
Yes, so for the benefits of everyone, yes, the SMTA does apply also to commercial users, and actually the idea is that when somebody develops a new variety that, again, introgresses materials from the multilateral system, or if he's a subscriber, then they bring these products to the market, they indeed would make payments on those products. So it works for non-commercial as well as for commercial research. That's perfectly fine.
We have a question from Robert Santiago, and then I think we need to go to the other meeting. Yes. But I can stay here if you guys want to go.
In fact, I'll go to the other meeting now. Thank you very much, everyone. Very much appreciate it. And we'll have another one of these after the working group meeting in July. Thank you.
Please go ahead, John.
Thank you, Isabel. And this might be a bit kind of derailing from the main topic, but I see that DSI has become really important, and having more information, it has been very valuable in how you transfer it. But I'm wondering, is there any initiatives that are trying to do also more phenotyping of the accessions that we have? Because as we advance on digital sequencing, we also have to accompany with this other component of phenotyping that tends to be also costly, and that, however, it will help us to know better what it is in our gene banks, and in that way, how we can transfer better things to other users. So I'm just wondering if you guys know that there's other interest around the phenotyping besides the DSI that we have been discussing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question, Roberto. For some reason, the phenotyping data has not received the same amount of attention as digital as sequencing data. But continuously, many negotiators and also the private sector and research organizations in these negotiations remind us that phenotyping data continues to be fundamental, and also perhaps the most resource consuming data in terms of its development. I don't think the phenotypic data is going to suddenly gain a very prominent space in the negotiations. On the technical side, you are probably much more aware than us about phenotypic platforms like regional, worldwide phenotyping efforts. Those things are not being mentioned in the negotiations. The one perhaps thing that is important is that under the standard material transfer agreement, that the multilateral system, one of the obligations of the provider is to provide the material together with all the available non-confidential data. And our understanding is that phenotypic data falls under that category. And also the recipient has the obligation to share non-confidential information arising from the use of the plant genetic resource that the recipient has received under the multilateral system. So there is clearly this intention, this interest and this intention to increase the use of the sharing of all kinds of data, including phenotypic data. But discussions around phenotypic data are not going beyond that for the moment.
Thank you.
Jawahar Ali, sorry, I didn't read your name correctly.
Yeah, good day to all of you. I just like to understand what is the tracking mechanism of the IPs and in the CG, how do you chase your recoverables from the people who are exploiting the benefits from the materials they take from the gene bank and other places? We don't have a tracking mechanism or the policing system, in other words. So how do we position ourselves in this regard? How you get your whatever is due to us should come to us, because many people take it, but nobody's reporting back. Lack of transparency is the biggest issue.
Claudia, you want to take this one? But you're muted, Claudia.
Thanks. Yes, thank you, Ali, for the important question. I think in terms of what is due to us, it would be in the case of, for example, PGRFA under development, or where we are indeed licensing some of the innovation that we have come up with and provide those advanced material. So I suppose it goes with the reporting obligations that we include in the licensing contracts, on the additional condition that we include in the SMTA. But then, as you said, if there needs to be a larger effort, if it should that be worthwhile system-wide to set a mechanism in place, that's something perhaps that could be further discussed by the group. There's a community of practice, the IP focal points, for example. So it's something that could be considered. But I think more generally, the system that has been set up under the treaty, the current multilateral system, as well as the new one, that's the idea that we wouldn't be tracking and tracing specific PGRFA into products. It's based on trust, and unfortunately there is mistrust that perhaps somebody could be underreporting, but the responsibility falls on the recipients to declare annually, again, if there is any payment that is due and the reason why that payment is due. So that's the current system. And of course, the main reason why payments are due is precisely because those products on which payments might be due are not available for others for more research and breeding, and therefore probably the restriction is because there's a patent that covers those products. So that's how the current reporting is, and reporting obligations are set. And then, of course, if there was a violation, or if we become aware of a violation, we or anyone else, we can report it to the so-called third-party beneficiary under the SMTA, which is the FAO that has legal personality. So the FAO legal office and the treaty secretariat, they will then, first of all, seek information if they think that somebody has, for example, a due payment and has not reported that. or if they are violating the terms under which they could obtain IP on products or not, they can seek more information and then also seek remedial action through various amicable dispute settlement and ultimately through arbitration, which is envisaged in the standard material transfer agreement. So there is a governance structure there to address the issue, but nobody is actively, routinely monitoring what happens across the board with materials and with patents. So that's why we think, again, it's very important to have at least this disclosure, so that we know not when the payments are due at the end of the fiscal year, if they report or if they're not reported, but we want to know upfront, and that will make life easier for everyone, also for the breeders, because if they are breeding with things that are protected, they will know they need to seek a license first and not risk of being sued later on. I hope that covers, at least in parts, what you were asking for. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
So I see there are no more questions for now. Perhaps we can wrap it up. And so thank you very much to everyone who stayed with us until the end. Again, if you have any more questions that come up in your work in relation to what we have discussed today, feel free to reach out to any one of us from the Gene Bank Accelerator policy team. There'll be more information sessions like this one. As I mentioned earlier, we will be presenting the work on the patent landscape on the 20th of this month. So if that's something that you might be affected by these particular regulations and rights, or you're working with improved materials, then please join us, and we will give you more details about that in that context. Thanks a lot, and thank you, Isabel.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank
to all
you.
of you.
Nice
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.